As most of you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Irvine, California, attending the Pacific Islander and Asian American Ministries Convocation, or PAM, P-A-A-M. PAM was organized in 1975 and actually voted into existence by the National Office of the UCC in 1975. The vision of PAM is to unite and move forward at the national, regional, and local levels as Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans in the United Church of Christ, sharing their unique gifts with one another and the church. Now, I was invited to this year's PAM convocation by one of the Hawaiian kahu that many of you may know, Kahu Reni Mau, who used to come here and work with children on Kauai. He still works with children and young people. But Lihue Christian Church, this church, had budgeted funds for me to attend various conferences and workshops, and this is one that I chose to attend. So because this church helped pay part of my expenses for attending, I kind of owe you a report. So in one way, the sermon today is that report. The convocation theme, the Josiah generation, was based on the story of King Josiah, which is found in the books of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. And while the stories as they're written in these books are not quite the same, because the timing of the events differs between them, the main story of this young king is the same. He was a reformer for the faith in Judah. So let's hear a little bit about King Josiah. But first, I want to sort of set the context for this. And so I need to give you a short history of the kingdom of the Hebrews after they fled Egypt, just so you remember kind of what we're talking about. So when the Hebrews fled Egypt, they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness before entering the land that God had given them. When they went into that land, the land was divided into tribal units based on the 12 sons of Jacob, or I should say based on the 12 sons of Jacob, and there was one other son, Levi, who actually, that tribe did not get land, but they were priests, and as priests, the other tribes were expected to take care of the Levites. At first, the leadership was done by judges and priests, but then the people demanded of God a king, so that they could be like their neighboring countries who all had kings. They wanted a king too, and God relented, and he gave them King Saul, then King David, then King Solomon, the wise king, and the one who built the temple in Jerusalem. But on Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel split in two. 10 tribes became the northern kingdom of Israel, and 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, became the southern kingdom of Judah. Both countries continued to have kings, some good, many not so good. Both countries continued to have pressure from outside influences, and that pressure included other gods coming in to take the place of Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of the Hebrews. The people in both of these countries, Judah and Israel, began to worship the other gods, and they continued to fight wars with their neighbors. The first kingdom to fall was the northern kingdom of Israel, which was overthrown in roughly 722 before Christ. The Assyrians invaded and took control. The southern kingdom of Judah remained, but the kings, as had the kings of Israel, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, a phrase that you find scattered all through Kings and Chronicles. The kings of both countries did not do God's will. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, with a few exceptions, one of them being King Josiah. Josiah's father was Ammon, who was one who did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so much so that finally his own servants killed him. When that happened, the people of the land chose Josiah to be the next king. The story of the beginning of Josiah's reign starts with this. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. Now think of you, what 8-year-olds do we have in this congregation? Would you turn over kingship to these 8-year-olds? Josiah reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father David. The good kings went back all the way to David and wanted to do what David did in leading the people in following God. Now, I would be here, could stand here and debate whether or not David was a good king. But the Jews believed David was a good king. Josiah didn't turn aside. He didn't go right. He didn't go left. He followed the ways of the Lord. When Josiah was 18, he decided to restore the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the temple had not been restored, but it had been taken over by gods, by idols that the people had brought in, idols to other gods, altars to other gods. The people would come into this temple of Yahweh and they would worship other gods. This was a sacrilege to Yahweh, and also in Josiah's view. In the clearing out of the temples, though, the workers who were doing that clearing out found something that transformed Josiah's reign into one that transformed Judah, one that led the people of Judah back to God, at least for a very brief period. One of the priests, whose name was Hilkiah, he was a priest at the temple, found the book of law given by the Lord through Moses. It eventually made its way to King Josiah, where one of Josiah's aides read it aloud to him. And the king, on hearing these words, reacted by tearing his clothes. Even today, the tearing of one's clothes in the Hebrew Jewish tradition is a sign of mourning, great, great mourning. Josiah was mourning because when he heard the words of the book of the law, he realized how far from God the people of Judah had strayed. So he then asked his aide to go inquire of the Lord for me and for those who are left in both Israel, which was still under Assyrian captivity, and those in Judah, concerning the words of this book that you have found. For in this book, the wrath of the Lord is poured out on us in great measure, because our ancestors did not keep the word of the Lord. They did not act in accordance with all that was written in this book. So the aide and the priest Hilkiah go off, and they go to, and this does not get emphasized in some places, they go to a woman. They go to a prophetess called Huldah. They go to a woman to interpret God's book of the law and to tell Josiah what the Lord had in store. Something to remember as we come across folks who do not believe a woman should be standing in this pulpit. But that's another story. So the aide and the priests go to the prophet Huldah. And Huldah confirms what is written in the book of law. God will indeed bring disaster upon Judah because it has forsaken God. When Josiah heard this, he went to the temple and he took that book of law and he read it to all of the people gathered there. Then the second thing he did was made a covenant, a new covenant between the people of Judah and God, to follow all of the commandments and laws and decrees and statutes that God had given them in the book of law, and to worship one God, Yahweh. According to the story in both Kings and Chronicles, the people did just that. So for many years, calm and worshiping God, one God, reigned in Judah. But now back to Pam and the Josiah generation. I'm still pondering on the many different ways King Josiah and his actions were represented in the workshops, sermons, and speeches at the convocation. One of the workshops was entitled The Musubi Mold, Reshaping the Josiah Generation. I know some of you are sitting out there laughing. What does musubi have to do, or spam musubi have to do with Josiah? The presenter was Lynn Hanamoto, who was raised here in Waimea. Unfortunately, I don't know her maiden name, but some of you probably know her. She said she learned to make musubi from her mom. But what does a Hawaiian snack for picnics and potlucks have to do with a 2,600-year-old king of Judah? Like the mold used to form musubi, King Josiah used the book of law to form, or rather reform, the nation of Judah. Lynn actually put it this way as she was showing us how to form musubi. For a long time, my life felt like a bowl of loose rice, scattered, messy, and lacking a clear shape. It wasn't until I encountered the story of Josiah that I realized I was trying to live without a mold. Much like the process of making musubi, I had to let God press into my life, fry away the things that didn't belong, and bind my heart to his word. As we filled the musubi molds with handfuls of rice and warm slices of spam and seasoning, as we pressed hard to form a shape that could be wrapped in seaweed, we were asked to identify the idols in our own lives. We were asked to realize the importance of being pressed by the word, and to let ourselves be bound to God in a lasting covenant. One of the other workshops was entitled Japanese Americans, Struggles, Resilience, Determination. It was given by Michael Okamura, a retired banker and Yonsei fourth generation Japanese American with roots in Tottori, Wakayama, and Fukushima. In this workshop, he spoke of the similarities and differences between the United States immigrants of today and the Japanese immigrants from 120 or so years ago, and reminded us of the importance of supporting today's immigrants. I'm going to read you some of his words, because these are his words, not mine. America's immigrants today are facing similar but different escalated tensions that the immigrants from Japan and their offspring faced 120 plus years ago in America. The earliest Japanese immigration to the Kingdom of Hawaii and the U.S. mainland began in the late 19th, early 20th century, where Issei, first generation, faced tremendous adversaries in foreign lands. American-born children of Japanese ancestry bridged America and Japan, and although not completely accepted by mainstream U.S. society, and the Nisei generation worked hard despite racial discrimination. World War II forever altered Japanese Americans, and from the post-war era, the community rebuilt and moved forward for the sake of the young sensei, third generation, who became highly educated and were working professionals throughout American society. Dedicated groups of sansei successfully fought for redress and reparations from Congress for themselves, their parents, and their grandparents, who were unjustly and prejudicially imprisoned in the U.S. Department of Justice camps, assembly centers, and concentration camps during World War II. The young Yonsei, fourth generation, and multiracial Japanese Americans are now speaking up to support today's immigrants being racially profiled and detained, since no one spoke up for the pre-World War II Japanese Americans who were on the verge of being imprisoned in America's concentration camps. So Michael was reminding us of the history of the Japanese migrants here. And the third, and this is lastly my last story, this third story is one of a beautiful field trip we took to a place called Tanaka Farms. Yeah, Tanaka. Oops, gotta find it here. At Tanaka Farms, let me read you first a little bit about Tanaka Farms. It's very short. Like many Asian and American families, this story begins in the early 1900s. The United States has already opened its doors to the world. The manufacturing industry is making great strides. Transportation is expanding. The world is simultaneously getting bigger and smaller. Takeo Tanaka, a young man who had only known Japan as his home, decides to leave Hiroshima and his family behind. He gets on a ship and travels to the coast of America. This is where his legacy begins and continues to this day. Tanaka Farms, as it stands today, is a tribute to the hard work and grit of a simple farmer. He struggled through times of adversity and discrimination, fleeing with his family to a somewhat safer area during World War II before returning to California to work the fields that would feed the next generations. Eventually, he was able to pass on the farm, and the legacy continues to what is now the fifth generation. In contrast, Josiah, as described in 2 Chronicles 34, was crowned at an early age. He ruled Jerusalem from the time he was 8 years old until his late 30s. We could assume he had a relatively comfortable life, but the decisions he had to make had huge consequences for his people and the generations that followed. Josiah was also farming in a sense, making the ground fertile, feeding the growing shoots, taking out the weeds that were choking the essential fruit. The harvest for Josiah was the culmination of some very hard decisions. At Tanaka Farms, Farmer Glenn is setting up a museum of sorts with newspaper and magazine articles about the Japanese farmers that settled in Orange County and also in Hawaii. One could easily spend a couple of hours reading all of the articles, all the ones he has accumulated and posted on the wall of a farm building. Through perseverance and hard work, through wars and internment and laws made to discriminate against the Japanese, they were at one time not allowed to own land in California. They have survived and transformed the areas in which they settled. These three events and all of the other workshops and speeches and worship services reminded me of the hardships that all immigrants face when coming to the United States, or any country for that matter. Immigration is hard, and it always has been. Newcomers are often not welcome in their new home. Most often, even in Scripture, immigration is for economic reasons, reasons beyond the control of the immigrants. Josiah was not an immigrant as we would describe it today, but he was a reformer, a transformer. He transformed the nation of Judah. And immigrants, as they are shaped by the culture and the customs of their new homeland, transform this new land they're in too. I am still processing what this convocation taught me and what it means to me. But one of the things that I have thought of is this. As each new immigrant country comes to the United States, they are the low folk on the totem pole. It was the Japanese at one time. It was the Irish and the Italians at another time. Or those people that are natives here, our indigenous tribes, our Hawaiians. They were told, you have to change. They were put into a tight mold. The same thing is happening with our immigrant churches that are coming here from Micronesia. They are told to fit into a very tight mold, like the musubi mold. But in making the musubi, what I learned is there are hundreds of different recipes. Yes, it's rice and Spam probably wrapped in seaweed, but the one I was making had furikake and it didn't have any sauce. Others I was told, oh, we have to put this kind of sauce on it, or we have to put this kind of spice, we have to put this kind of herb. To me, that tells me what our immigrants and what kind of mold are we making for our immigrant churches, our brothers and sisters in Christ? Are we forcing them to be in the shape that is only rice and only Spam and only seaweed? Or can we let those immigrants also be some of the spices, some of the herbs, some of the sauces? Because all of us who are not native Hawaiians, we have immigrants in our past. I came from Europe, Germany, Denmark, England, Ireland, Wales, all different. But I'm welcomed here as an American. I'm still thinking about this. What does it mean? But so I thank you for letting me go to the PAM convocation, for letting me have Phyllis preach for me. It was a wonderful convocation. And I am proud to say that I am from this church of Japanese heritage. And there were many people that I met that knew some of you from way back. People said, oh, I have ties to Kauai. I have ties to Kauai. I don't remember half of their names. But I also saw the Filipino church from San Francisco, part of a Chukia's ministry, the JRD group, the Marshallese congregation from Orange County. Pacific Islanders are welcome here. Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans are welcome here. This is the United Church of Christ, and it is our covenant with God that we welcome all. Amen.